Thank you for watching this brief lecture on sound production practices in the late 60s in the context of Haskell Wexler's Medium Cool. Please watch the film before continuing, as a few plot points and the ending of this film will be examined. Medium Cool is a volatile film, biting in its critical look at racial division, bold in its indictment of urban class warfare, and provoking in its examination of morality, especially on the part of the filmmaker. In this film, Robert Forster plays a fictional documentary filmmaker whose journey from being a bystander to provocateur to eventual victim is juxtaposed against the backdrop of the 1968 Democratic National Convention and its associated fallout. The actual DNC convention of '68 took place during a year of great upheaval and violence in the United States, falling 4 months after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., 2 months after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and amidst continued widespread demonstration and civic unrest surrounding the American military involvement in Vietnam. To watch this film now is an exercise in self-examination, and to view this movie as a student of film is to watch yourself on screen as a character. Medium Cool was a grand experiment in cinema verite, a sort of realness aesthetic that became inextricably tied to independent film, drawing heavy influence from documentary and guerrilla filmmaking style. Medium Cool is a great example of cinema verite in a couple of ways. First, in that it depicts filmmakers working, photographing, and recording the visuals and the sound that are a part of this film. And second, in the movie's final shot, where Wexler himself points the camera towards us, the viewers, as if to suggest that the audience too is complicit and responsible for the movie's imagery. Its content is what makes the film still relevant, but it is its structure that demonstrates genius. Seemingly disjointed, the narrative demonstrates an awareness of its visual and oral impact on the viewer, starting with generally more low-contrast shots and sound, culminating in high-contrast imagery, dramatic chaos, and cacophony at the end. For example, early in the film you might recall scenes when we're in the impoverished neighborhood of Southside Chicago. The audio is captured with an omnidirectional microphone, creating a homogeny of sound, without hierarchy, all seemingly equal. Near the end of the film, as the true-to-life protests intensify, we see the merging of more contrasting colors and more layering in the sound effects. Its narrative structure follows a similar trajectory, the building and building of increasingly complex characters, the lengthening of the film in the form of busier and busier scenes, all of which peaks in a single climactic and politically noisy statement at the end. The film is bookended with a very interesting narrative and visual echo. The very first scene of the film depicts the actions of two jaded filmmakers, John and Gus, who film and record the aftermath of a car accident, but fail in their human morality to assist. Like in Jean-Luc Godard's Weekend from 1967, the car accident is also used here as a metaphor to the cultural malaise and urban destruction at the heart of the script's criticism. John and Eileen's tragic end, alone in the woods, as a detached and ambivalent photographer simply gazes on without offering a helping hand, is the ironic opposite number to how Forster's character behaved at the start of the film, in a cold, unfeeling manner. The visual echo is a formal technique where temporal and thematic associations are made between two similarly staged images or scenes. This is an example of a visual echo within the shot. Notice that the poster on the wall and the actor in the foreground are similarly staged and composed. Meaning here, of course, depends on director intent, but it strikes the viewer in a way that might suggest intersection. Mise en abîme, as the French call it, is related to the visual echo, in which a copy of the image is placed within itself, sort of like a story within a story. It too can be a recurring image or a suggestion somewhere in the imagery that calls attention to the world outside of the image or of the film itself. The film's title is derived from Marshall McLuhan's treatise, Understanding Media, in which he states that so-called cool media falls into a category of expression that requires the viewer or listener to work harder to engage it. At the risk of oversimplifying, television is an example of a cool medium, as it requires the listener to concentrate on the message it delivers, because many other stimuli might be present in the room as you watch it. It seems to this narrator, at least, that McLuhan accurately described our current popular method of watching programming on our phones. A couple items of interest sound-wise. This film depicts in the mise-en-scène, the viewer sees on camera the mode of audio production by which they recorded the sound for this film. The audio device that you see here, carried by actor Peter Bonners, is very much not a prop, but the device that they used to record on set, the Nagra IV. The Nagra IV was in heavy use for about 22 years or so since its introduction to film sets in 1968, and this device saw use as late as the mid-90s. The high-speed Nagra tape generated less tape noise, audible hiss to the listener, than that of magnetic tape at slower speeds. This quarter-inch mono ran through the recorder at 7.5 inches per second and possessed a good amount of headroom and a pretty wide signal-to-noise ratio, the level of an audio signal's optimal level and the noise floor. For those of you who are curious, the Nagra had a signal-to-noise ratio of about 60 dB. At any rate, the device's stable constitution enabled it to record fairly reliably even under duress, which meant that this device was good for rugged production, outdoor shoots, and documentary. As of this recording, the Nagra is still used today, with the Nagra VII being able to record on an SD card at sampling frequencies as high as 192 kHz. The microphones that you see being used on set were most likely dynamic, as they tend to be more rugged and don't need an external power source. As far as sound design goes, compare and contrast this scene where Robert Forster's character John and Mariana Hill, playing Ruth, play around with the bedsheet. The direction and the position of the microphone is how one might expect to hear it nowadays. Positioned behind the camera, picking up articulations in front of the camera lens. The camera moves, so too does the mic. Greater intimacy is achieved in recording this way. What you hear is the actual audio captured live with minimal editing. The flapping of the pigeon wings is clearly dubbed in, but for the most part, this sound appears faithful to the scene and the way they recorded it. The sound of the political convention near the end of the film demonstrates a similar kind of observational homogeny to the sound. It's hard to hear one conversation over another. However, contrast that with the riot scene outside moments later, and you can clearly hear manipulation and intention. Where sound is typically an afterthought, the filmmaker here puts it front and center. Interestingly, what Wexler created was sort of a merging of reality and fiction, a commentary piece that at times seems like a documentary, but with scripted dialogue that supports Wexler's own worldview and thesis. Medium Cool is a complex exercise in sound design and editing, while at the same time a criticism of our tumultuous times. Thanks for watching.